to my voice was high.
The mic is on.
Oh, I didn't see you there. What did you think about the new intro? Comment. Okay, so long time since I did a grading video. Let's do it. I started making my own films on DV tapes. Actually, even VHS before that. But once the Canon 5D Mark II came out, it changed how I worked. I made my first doc, Zero Silence, on that camera. Most of my Netflix documentary, The Pearl of Africa, was shot on the 5D Mark III with the Magic Lantern. Since then I've moved on to using a C300 Mark II, but I thought this video could help anyone making films on DSLRs and what you should think about to maximize the cinematic look of your camera. But even though I've made several TV series and 3 feature films on DSLRs, I'm not a professional colorist. I'm a cinematographer that has graded my own material for over 10 years, so I do have tons of experience, both grading and shooting on DSLRs. My view on how to grade is very much in line with the styles I like. So if you're into DSLR contrasty looks, this video probably isn't for you. To me, that look isn't cinematic, it's video. I put it in the same category as DV was put in back in the days.
Was it hard for you to sometimes to cooperate with Cleo and Nelson, or did they always accept you being around?
I moved in with them the first time I met Nelson. I moved in with them, and that kind of helped, I think. Cinematic to me is creating a consistent film look, and that can be a contrasty look. But I think it has to represent what the eye can see. And when you drag blacks to 100% black, or whites to 100% white, that isn't what our eyes see. It's what video color spaces see. I try to avoid that. So first off, when you're shooting to create a cinematic film look, turn off any sharpening or noise reduction in the camera. Those things introduce artifacts, and you can't get rid of them in the post-production. Try to shoot in log mode on the camera, but before Magic Lantern, I didn't do that and still created a consistent film look. So this is not a must, but log does make it easier to get a clean image, because it doesn't set the contrast in the camera. But do understand that log mode doesn't magically give you more dynamic range. Basically, log compresses the colors so that it doesn't look like you overexpose. But that can be a problem, because even though it creates a little bit better highlight roll-off, if you do over or underexpose, you're fucked. You get noise, chromatic aberration, bad sharpening, loss of detail, banding, the list goes on. Learn to freaking expose an image correctly. Use false color that can help you, otherwise histograms are available on pretty much all DSLRs. That's what you least should do to make sure you expose correctly. And then expose like you want it to look in the end. It's always the best way to make a film look cinematic. Test it out beforehand if you can. Otherwise you're going to be in trouble in the post. You need to cover up for the problems that DSLRs have. Mainly do that in the camera, not in the post-production. This is a material that I've shot in Rec 709, the common color space if you don't use log mode on your camera. If I would grade that material, I would be really careful doing it. If you try to push it too much, it's gonna break apart straight away. You will get noise and banding. Banding is when whole skies or walls behind me would fall apart just because there isn't enough color information. I always start in DaVinci Resolve with creating a node that does some noise removal. If you're using the basic version, this step won't be possible because it's only the studio version that lets you remove noise. This part is crucial to me to clean up an image. So consider getting a plugin for this, like the Neat Video one, or upgrade to the studio version. It's probably the same price by now because the studio version is really cheap. The nodes that Resolve uses, that's just like the effect layers in any other program. Resolve is much more precise for grading than Premiere or Final Cut, but you can do everything there too. Usually I slap on 20 in the chroma field. Then I usually try to do as little general noise removal as I can. If there is noise like dark scenes for instance, 2 can work most of the time, but sometimes you need to save the material by going up to 5 even. This one is shot on a 5D Mark III, so it's a bit noisy, especially because it wasn't shot with the Magic Lantern firmware. And then another tip, if you've shot in 50 or 60p, but are editing in 24 or 25p. I like to add some motion blur to make it look more natural then. Usually about like 15 or 30, but it can vary depending on the type of material and movement in the footage. This is done to smooth the stabbing feel that you can get when you've shot in too many frames. And why shoot in 50p if you know that you're gonna use it in 25? That's kind of stupid. And not really, because you get much smoother slow motion if you shoot in 50p for instance. But you might not decide that all the time when you shoot a documentary. So often I shoot in 50p and then this effect smooths it out so it looks more natural. When you do doc work, this is a lifesaver, but if you do something that's storyboarded, it's better to just do it on the spot and decide on the frame rates beforehand. Then I add a node to balance the color. The quick way of doing this is to find a neutral color, white or gray, and then take the color pipette and then select that. If your image isn't exposed correctly, you might want to add another node before doing it. So you set the light of the image first. So add a node, then we set the lift, gamma and gain correctly. I like to set the lift around 128 IRE and gain between 640 and 900. 640 is really low, so that's when you have an evening shot that doesn't have a hard light source. But 900 is more the normal type of daytime with sunlight type of feel. This is just a personal preference when it comes to the IRE, where I think it looks good if you want to avoid the over contrasty look that YouTube and DSLR video often has. Okay. So, IRE, what the fuck is that? Okay, so IRE is the level 1 to 100. It's percentage of light, basically. I'm trying to simplify this. And in DaVinci Resolve, you have different values, up to 1023, I think, 1023, down to 0. This is a different scale. In that scale, it's basically you would get skin tones in the middle, around the middle or above basically. So maybe in IRE, maybe skin tones would be 40 to 70%-ish, 75 depending on the skin type. So darker person, different skin tone. Lighter person like myself, maybe I would end up around 70, 60, 70-ish. And then if you transfer that to a DaVinci Resolve scale, it would be different. So it would be around 500-ish. Yeah, so that's probably good to know. This is the diagram that kind of explains it. Okay, let's get back to the grading video. Then for the gamma, I set it according to the character that I want the image to have. This is basically the midtones. So if you didn't do it yet, go back and balance the color now. Then in between these nodes, add a saturation one. For Rec 709 footage, you're gonna have to desaturate the image. But if you should log, you should add saturation so it becomes more colorful. And then do this to an amount that looks natural, and pay attention to the skin tones, because you want them usually around 70 to 75 IRE if you want them to look natural. And in the vector scope you can turn the skin tone line on, so you can see where the proper skin tones are supposed to be. Then usually after the light node I add a second light node, but let's just add it and then leave it for now. Add another node and name that one to sharpening, then add some sharpening to the image. Here it's important to not over sharpen, just add a little bit and mask the area you want. It can be a sloppy mask that just feathers naturally, but it doesn't have to be very detailed. Then add another node, and here you just want to add a LUT that you like. There's a couple of LUTs in Resolve that you can just slap on. Let's choose the Fuji D55 film look for this one. Then let's add a node to add some grain. Add the grain effect to the node, and then I usually like a little bit grainy footage. It especially, I think, makes DSLRs look more natural. It goes for all digital stuff. It looks a bit too clean in my opinion. And with DSLRs is a good way to cover up artifacts. So having done the noise reduction before, it might look a bit unnatural. Adding the grain here covers up that in an instance. I usually add the 16mm 500 ISO preset. You can go a bit overboard in terms of the grain because people watch it on devices most of the time. And then in the final node, I just make sure that the blacks clip at a certain point. In other words, I crush the blacks and make them fall off in a more natural way. Where you want the black point is up to you, but I like it to be around 128-ish IRE. So go into the curves, then crush the blacks in a subtle way. Then I go into the saturation and desaturate the blacks and whites. And that's depending on how much color cast you have. Because if you have a little bit of color cast, you can just clean it up here. And now the look is basically set. So I go back to the light node number 2 that we created earlier. And then I just mask the areas that I want to pop. And then just raise the highlights a little bit to make it stand out. Okay, this is one way of making your DSLR footage look good. It depends on if you use log or Rec 709. Both will work, but this way of working covers up the limitations that DSLRs have. But as I said, you need to expose properly for this to work. Otherwise, there's no saving. Let me know about your workflow in the comments. And download this LUT if you want to achieve the same look as this footage.